Good evening. Tonight I'll be refuting Luis's claim that violent video games have a significantly negative effect on the overall well-being of children. His secondary claims consisted of 1. Playing video games can lead children to develop bad habits. 2. Violent video games can instill a false perception of reality. And 3. Violent video games have negative effects on the mental state of a child. In his first claims, he brings up 2 points. The first being less time devoted to studies, and the second is that violent video games leads to the development of aggression. In his first point, that less time is devoted to studies, he merely prevents a hypothetical claim, and he gives no studies and no research. The same can be said about going on Facebook, or playing outside, or watching television, and the like. The aggression study has no causality. There may be a correlation, but that would demand a sweeping inference. He gave you Professor Craig Anderson's claim that violent video games are addicting, and the repetitive violence leads children to repeat these behaviors. On July 31st, 2006, the U.S. District Court for the District of Minnesota struck down the Minnesota Violent Video Games Act. After hearing Anderson's findings, the court found his data completely insufficient to demonstrate an empirical, causal link between video games and violence in minors. 2 months after this trial and 2 years after Anderson's study, the University of Illinois had waited the ongoing polemic regarding a possible link between violent video games and real-world aggression. A fantasy violence video game was used in the study. Players were not statistically different from non-playing control group in their beliefs on aggression after playing the game than they were before playing the game. Nor was gameplay a predictor of aggressive behaviors. Compared to the control group, the players neither increased their argumentative behaviors after gameplay, nor were significantly more likely to argue with their friends and partners. His secondary claim was that violent video games can instill a false perception of reality. He supported this claim by mentioning how video games lead to the desensitization of violence and how players would be more willing to engage in such violence. Firstly, studies done on desensitization that have herein been performed show only short-term effects. Maybe these effects don't have long-term effects, or maybe gameplay in a real-world setting can have other offsetting effects. Additionally, there's no direct correlation between playing video games and engaging in the violent acts after this. This cause-effect claim is fallacious. Desensitization is one thing, and engaging is completely different. Even if a link were to exist, desensitization might be good. Amanda Schaffer of Slate magazine points out that scenarios less disturbing and perhaps easier to deal with than in real life may be presented through video games. The games may also encourage kids and adults to rehearse aggressive solutions to conflict, meaning that these thought processes become more available before real-life conflicts occur. His third claim was that violent video games have negative effects on the mental state of a child. This point actually utilizes circular reasoning to repeat his main argument. He supported his claim with Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, who finds that video games teach the skill and the will to kill. This cause-effect claim is simply invalid. Grossman's claims are also outdated. All his scholarly works have been published before 2001. His most recent novel was The Two-Space War, which was written in 2004. It is a military science fiction epic. The credibility of Grossman is literally out of this world. A 2008 Science Daily study finds that there is no obvious link between real-world violence statistics and the advent of video games. If anything, the effect seems to be the exact opposite, and one might argue that video game usage has reduced real violence. Despite several high-profile incidents in U.S. academic institutions, violent crime, particularly among the young, has decreased dramatically since the 1990s. While video games have steadily increased in popularity and use, for example, in 2000 there were 1.3 million violent crimes reported, and there were 1.4 the year before. With millions of sales of violent games, the world should be seeing an epidemic of violence, he said. Instead, they have declined. The statistics are there. Violence has decreased while gaming popularity has increased. Desensitization has only been proven to show short-term effects, and the link between real-life violence and video game violence is merely speculation. Thank you.
All right, the labeling was good. I thought your challenge on the reasoning on the first point was pretty solid. Excuse me. I liked especially the court ruling on the evidence that the advocate used, and then you had some good counter evidence to suggest that this is not a relationship that is really supported. On the second point, you've got a challenge on desensitization that's a little bit general. You do say it's short-term, but I didn't hear any evidence on that particular point. Then you've got this other kind of counterclaim that says that it might be beneficial. And the quote is pretty good, but I'm not sure how it demonstrates that it is beneficial. And so that inference was not as clear as it ought to be. On the third point, I'm not sure that the challenge to the one guy's credibility because he wrote a novel makes him unreliable, although I did think if you're going to have that nice ad hominem attack saying his theories are out of this world, that was kind of funny. But I think the better argument is that the information is outdated. I mean, we've had 8 years since he last published anything. The last thing he published was, in fact, a novel that's got nothing to do with these kinds of issues. And it's the only citation that's given by the advocate on that point. I think that's perhaps a more telling piece of information. And then come in with your general counterclaim evidence there, which I thought was a lot more effective.